Before we get started, I just wanted to say that we're so grateful for you, our amazing listeners, and all of the support that you've shown us over the past while. Whether it's through reviews on iTunes or your other podcatchers, or financial support on Patreon or PayPal, or even just dropping a comment on our YouTube or Mastodon, it's really lovely to feel seen and part of a larger conversation about Solarpunk. At the end of the day, we're a little independent podcast producing ad-free content, and we'd like to keep it that way as long as possible, and we believe we can with your support. Okay, on to the episode. Hey listeners, today I'm talking to Doug Jones, board chair of the Waterloo Region Community Garden Network and board member of the Food Systems Roundtable Waterloo Region. He has a lifelong interest in food security, and he is passionate about finding ways to support people's ability to feed themselves in a sustainable manner and be supported by their community. So welcome to the podcast, Doug.
Thank you, Ariel. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you for sitting down with me. I'm excited to ask you about the Waterloo Region Community Garden Network. So could you just briefly describe it for our listeners?
Yeah, so the Garden Network was started with public health support back in 1997, recognizing that there were significant health advantages for people to be able to get outside, do some things, some activity things, building community, growing a bit of food for themselves, and enjoying all the activities that come with urban gardening.
It's been running for a while now. So in that time, what has it kind of been doing? What has it accomplished?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to think about that because originally there'd be like a small number of gardens. And so public health was interested in saying, how can we increase the number of gardens that are there? There was an advocacy role with the council to make space and policy, municipal policy for community gardens as well. And our municipalities have evolved programs to support community gardens so that there's funding. Cambridge is just still developing its master plan, I think, but Cambridge and Kitchener have plans where you can get as much as $10,000 of an in-kind grant to put a community garden on private property. That would include a church property. And you can get as much as $30,000 to put a community garden on public property.
Wow, that's amazing. Sounds like the Garden Network was just able to be that advocate for community gardens in the region at council meetings and stuff like that. And that's sort of how that developed into sort of a more robust program. Is that right?
Yeah, that makes sense. And so one of the things that comes up, and I think you had mentioned this earlier, is that, a lot of people can think, well, community garden, but what is it? How do you get started? And all of those kinds of things. And that's what the Garden Network really was doing, was proposing that there be a way for people to get in touch and find out how to start a community garden. And the purpose of the Community Garden Network then was to provide supports for those new community gardens and the already established community gardens. And part of that meant like opportunities for the coordinators to meet and share information, discuss any problems they were having, do the problem solving, but also to get together and share food that they had produced in the community gardens. So one of the original community gardens was a working center garden called Queen's Green. And it was set up to help people who were food insecure grow some of the food that they needed for themselves. So as the community gardens have evolved, the political environment has changed some of the factors involved. And in 2018, the Community Garden Council became the Community Garden Network. It became a not-for-profit in 2018, was closely affiliated with Seeds of Diversity. It was interested in different programs around the value of seed savings, the value for reclaiming our sovereignty over seed production. And then when COVID hit, public health was distracted and needed to move into other focuses. And we were working in those times with the Food Systems Roundtable as well. There's a lot of initiatives from the Food Systems Roundtable around producing local food, meeting the needs of people that were food insecure. But something happened in the Community Garden Network, and that was that a lot of the community gardens became gentrified. And by gentrified, it means that rather than people that actually needed to food for themselves, they were taken over by people who had time and had a little bit of money. Each community garden runs itself and they decide how they're going to run their show, but they charge money for these plots. So when there's money being charged, sometimes it rules out the people that don't have that money. So part of the work we're trying to do now is move back to shift so that we have two things. One, one thing, we used to have a youth garden plot as well. So youth gardens plots for youth that are having trouble, like perhaps through Ray of Hope. And so we want each garden to possibly set aside a garden for youth that need to be able to get outside, reintegrate themselves in the community and have some of those positive things to do for themselves. But we also want to be able to have garden space for communal food that is going back into the food distros for the people that need food as well. So we're actually trying to work more closely integrated with the distros themselves and hopefully getting the coordinators to think in those terms.
The distros. What are distros?
Yeah, distro, good question. So people ask me that word and we use this lingo after a while and what is a distro? So it's a distribution. And so basically the distros are distributing food to people who are food insecure. And so this is an interesting piece because just like a food bank is a distro, a food bank is a representation of people who are food insecure and don't have the capacity to produce food for themselves. So this is where we're going now in our current role is to expand the number of community gardens. We're working with 1 million neighbors to talk about how do we plan for an expanding population in the region. And we want to be able to set land aside for urban farming. So not just necessarily garden plots, but bigger areas as well for urban farming, building access to water and the kinds of things that they need so that people can come out of their urban dwellings and find land that's nearby that they don't have to drive a car to. The goal essentially is a community garden within 15 minutes walking distance for everybody in the urban areas of the region.
That's amazing. I think with community gardens, I mean, just saying the word garden, you have the idea of like, oh, it's kind of a small thing. You can grow some tomatoes and some, like strawberries, but it's really only to feed maybe one family or one person almost, right? So it sounds kind of like the community gardens in the Waterloo Region Community Garden Network are much more like almost farms or agricultural endeavors.
So when I first started thinking about community gardens, I thought, oh, those are for the old ladies that want to grow flowers, right? And thought, oh, I'm not interested at all because I come from a farm production background, 600 acres and oats for Quaker, canola for McDonald's, and soybeans and corn and cattle and cow-calf operation, and all those kinds of things that are about feeding people, right? And the handoff that was given to me, like by my dad, who was a geneticist at the University of Guelph, when I was a child, he would say, Doug, there's 3 billion people on this planet, and we have to figure out how to feed them. So I've been immersed in this food production industries from the standpoint of recognizing that the most important thing that a government could do for its people traditionally was make sure that they had enough food. And,
Right.
and, and the connection here is really significant. I won't get into a lot of details on this, but there's a relationship between the amount of grain that a country has in storage and the value of its currency.
Really?
That's a shifting now so that the value of a country's currency is often based on more industrial production. But the primary production of agriculture is fundamentally important to our environmental well-being globally and to our local ability for people to have sustainable means of providing for themselves. When people give up their land and move into urban settings, they become completely dependent on the economy. In a way, this is a little blunt, but you can't vote against oil if you're dependent on the economy. So we have a whole bunch of people that are coming in. The newcomers are coming from agrarian cultures. They know how to grow food. They define food insecurity very differently. Food insecurity is not being able to grow my own food, Doug. And so what we need to do is think about how do we open up the capacity for people to grow the food that they want to grow to supplement the local food that we have. There's no reason for us to be food insecure except for policies and barriers to people growing their own food. And we're here to take down those barriers and have people help themselves.
Awesome. I was going to ask you, like, why do you think it's important for, like community garden networks? But you covered that, I feel. I was wondering when you were starting sort of the Waterloo Region Community Garden Network way back in the 90s, was there any, I don't know, template or examples of garden networks that were in effect already in other cities? Or, I mean, how did you sort of come up with the idea?
Yeah, so I'm sorry that I'm gapping on the name of the person that was instrumental in this, but she he had the vision, the public health support had the vision to be able to think about this idea of coordinating local community gardens. It was a really heartfelt initiative for her. And I've been looking around for the answer to that question, and I don't see anything else. I see different organizations with different structures, but none that are working on actual urban garden spaces, so urban farming spaces in Canada. There's a number of initiatives that will say, okay, we need a community garden here. They raise some funding, they go ahead and do those kinds of things. But this is I think the network itself is fairly unique in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it operates just on the front lines of like getting people space for community gardens if they want it and helping people understand sort of how to start a community garden, but then also operating at the municipal level or the regional level, in politics. And so I don't know, I feel like you have fingers in multiple pots.
Yeah, there are fingers in multiple pies, and that's part of what the Food Systems Roundtable was about policy, advising the municipalities in the region and even the province on policies around food. But the moves are quite radical. So to be politically radical is difficult to continue to garner support. But because we're facing such significant food insecurity due to tariffs, potentially increases in food prices, because we import a significant amount of our food, then we're looking at essentially a food insecurity emergency crisis, if you like. And we really need to be able to put significant funding into those initiatives because, first of all, we can't have people that are homeless and we can't have people that are going without food. And I believe we have a governmental responsibility as well as a community responsibility to make sure that people are housed and fed. And the other day, I was up in Collingwood spending some time with some people who were unhoused, and they didn't have a bowl, they didn't have a spoon. They said that the problem that they're having is that food is freezing. They have no place to warm up their food, so they don't have a way to secure a food supply. When they're unhoused, they're living in tents. There was conflict, and the people I was talking to had their blankets and everything burned, so they're facing minus 12-degree nights that night and having to huddle together, often huddling together with people that they don't even necessarily like or want to be huddled up with, just to keep warm enough to survive. The average life expectancy for a woman who's unhoused in Canada is 36. Come on, people. Like this is serious.
Yeah. I'm so glad that the Community Garden Network has that on its radar then, because that's
Mhm.
super important. And you can see how these issues are just so intertwined and connected. And like it's very hard to separate out, okay, there we have food insecurity over here and the homelessness crisis over here and the price of housing crisis over here. But no, it's all kind of together, like, and it affects every level of society, really. So it makes sense that the garden network sort of operates at different levels of society then.
Advocacy, right? It's advocacy for those intersections of concern, and really the answer is money. So interesting enough, like Dr. Valerie Tarasuk at the University of Toronto has done over 20 years of longitudinal research on food insecurity, and her conclusions are very, very clear that the cause of food insecurity is poverty. People don't have enough money to make their ends meet. And we're really making a very, 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 very clear statement that municipalities and region can't do it on their own, but the province and the federal government has to be able to put the money together in the system to bring down to address the needs of the people around housing and food insecurity itself.
Yeah, this is really a communal effort where like everybody has to pull together, right, on this issue because, you can't have people going one way and there can't be different priorities for the province with funding. If at the municipal level, they want to fund more gardens for people.
So what we've done is we have a 20-acre community garden now out at Petersburg, and that 20 acres was planted, tended, and harvested by probably some 60 people. And so 20 acres, you could probably feed about 450 people. And those people were actually, feeding their families and their community. They're coming in, they're food insecure for various reasons, including not being able to grow their own food. So
Mm.
some of the new Canadians will come in and they'll tell me, Doug, back in Zimbabwe, my son or my daughter might go to school and then they'd come home and they'd help us grow food and they knew what their purpose was. And we could teach them our values and we could teach them the way of taking care of ourselves and being independent as we could be because we grew our own food. We had land. And here we come here. And if we don't have land, I don't know how to teach my children how to provide for themselves, how to grow their own food. So there's a social cultural aspect of this that's really, really important. If you think about people that are coming from agrarian cultures and defining food insecurity as not having access to land, then it means that a sense of belonging comes from having access to land, a sense that we can be okay here, that we can thrive here, but also that we can teach our children our values. So I did my master's on the role of shared work in the parent-child relationship, and my father's family comes from a farm in Prince Edward Island, a farm where we ate our own food. We didn't have money. We had a way of taking care of ourselves. And we're very proud to be able to do that. But when my family moved to the city, I was the oldest son, and there was no sense of home for me without a farm. And so this is what's happening. There's a sociological factor and work factor. Work itself is a good word, but work factors that are completely understudied in terms of what does it mean to come from agrarian cultures and move to an urban environment and then have to figure out everything, not just how to feed yourself, but how to parent, how to be a family, how to build a community again, right?
Wow, I never thought of it that way. I did think of it in the way of even like, especially for young people who like have grown up in Canadian society but have grown up urban, there's a sense of being divorced from place, you know? You don't really know very much about the land that you live on or the plants and animals. And being part of a community garden is really a way to place yourself, to kind of learn that. And I guess it's not so much about parent-child relationship or parenting, but maybe just educating or honestly even like personal development.
But I think you referred to a sense of place, and there's a lot of people that are really talking about that. And I'll have a conversation coming up this week around the sense of belonging and what is it like to have a sense of place. And it's a very fascinating thing because, when I felt safe and secure on our home farm in Prince Edward Island, we had like the most beautiful view. If we climbed up the hill behind the house, like we could watch the moon rise up over Prim Point and sparkle off of Pownell Bay. And it was the most beautiful setting. And that's kind of what home is about, like the place where we find beauty and a sense of belonging and a sense of being welcome, right? Even being able to contribute to our well-being is so important.
Yeah. I think that lays the groundwork really lays the groundwork really well for my next question, actually. I'm interested in knowing a bit more about the mental health benefits of gardening. Or people are becoming more aware of it in recent years that gardening and being out in nature does have mental health benefits. Like the Waterloo Region Community Garden Network, their website has an entire page on it. And like I know that we've spoken about it before, and I was wondering if you could just elaborate on that a little bit.
So the way I think about it is that we're outside creatures living in a foreign environment this far north. Our natural environments are always outside. There's so much that happens to us, and even in terms of our eye development, that if we're inside and we have a limited scope, limited range for our eyes actually become more myopic. Apparently, there's research that indicates that. I hope I'm not just quoting quack research here, but I'm pretty sure that it's true. And a lot of the kids that are on screens are notably myopic because of that.
So he's not quoting quack research. A Korean analysis of 45 studies involving 335,524 participants looked at the use of digital screen devices such as mobile phones, game consoles, and television. And the results, which were mostly based on data from children, adolescents, and young adults, revealed that an additional hour of daily screen time is on average associated with 21% higher odds of having myopia or short-sightedness. I've linked an article down below that describes this in a bit more depth.
And so as outside creatures, like we benefit so much from not just the sunlight, which is very significant. Shortages of vitamin D are really, really predominant here. Shortages of iodine are showing up as well, which are not a function of being outside. There's a symmetry in nature that actually is healing for us as well. And one of the things I realized, like a friend of mine was having some issues in her family and she was very stressed out. And she said, well, I think I'm going to go outside for a while and just get away and be out in nature for a while. And I thought, what is it that's so relaxing about nature? And I thought the very first thing was, we don't judge it. And so immediately we can relax when we drop our judgments of things. And so we know the lion eats the gazelle. We know and we accept nature for what it is. So we don't judge it. And that is healing. That helps us to relax psychologically. And when we turn back in and think about going back in to that malaise, like we're already armed with our judgments. So we're already at a different level of stress again. And when we go out to the garden, we know that what we can do. And if I chop out plant that really is a good plant by mistake, I'm not too happy with myself, but I learned something and I can do it better next time, right? And I can do something that's potentially feeding my family or helping me to feel good about this or look forward to the squash or the carrot or even the tomatoes that I'm growing there and potentially look forward to my contribution back, if not to the rest of my family, then to my community in some way. And that helps me feel good about myself, right? So
Yeah.
psychologically, we're always looking at something that's more than just for me. It's what can we do for our community, those closest to family and community.
Right. As you were talking, I had the idea that came to me like a sense of futurity is so important to mental health, having something to look forward to. And, if you're growing carrots, you're looking forward to harvesting them. Even now, like in the depths of February when everything is, full of snow, like I went to a seed swap on Saturday, and I am looking forward to planting those seeds. And so
Mhm.
I'm already doing a bit of research into, okay, does this need to be cold stratified? And, like what kind of soil is best for this? So I can sort of plot out where in the yard I'm going to put it and, like how much sun does it get? So even then, I'm sort of looking forward to something and I have something to look forward to. And so that sense of futurity, it's an immediate futurity. I mean, I can look forward to having the fruits of my labor, as one might say, just sort of in front of me. It's very
Mhm.
tangible. And I think that's important.
But even if we're disappointed, like even if something doesn't develop well that we planted, then we get a chance to learn something. And one of the things that really struck me as being very, very important is the work of Constance Dombrowski. And she developed a number of programs for kids at school. And two of her key questions were about every story of the day, the good ones and the not so good ones, but for every story of the day or every experience. So what did you like about what you did? And then after spending lots of time there, she'd ask, so what would you do differently next time? That's launching us into that future, right? Where we're actually the agent of change for ourselves and our own well-being with that question.
Yeah, and I mean, coming back to your point about not judging nature, I mean, I'm not going to judge my carrots if they turn out looking a little bit wonky, Like, I'm not going to say, that's a bad carrot, it should have tried harder. Being able to inhabit that headspace of non-judgment is just, I mean, like you said, it's relaxing, but I feel like maybe like it exercises a muscle that we don't exercise that often. And so we're
Mhm.
able to more readily access it and carry it with us into different situations.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And there's cultural elements of that too. Like we're sort of whipped into this frenzy of what we have to do to accomplish things here, whether it's the speed of the cars, the type of building, the trains and all of those kinds of things. And so I think that one of the women was telling me that she came back from her home in Kenya and she's very, very comfortable and relaxed in Kenya. And she felt, that so much at home there. And that immediately when she came back here, she didn't like the color on the walls. Like there was something off all the time for her here. She felt that level of anxiety that is probably picking up a vibe, cultural vibe of insufficiency that we live in. And this vibe of insufficiency it's pretty important. And I believe it's crafted over many, many years. One of the Somali guys says to me, he says, this is a tough place to live up here, Doug. He said, not only do you have winter, he said, but where I come from, you can walk down the pathway and eat whatever you want from the bushes and trees around you. Like it's an edible environment. And one guy says, well, in this current political environment, you have to be careful you don't get shot. But basically he made his point that this is a difficult climate to live in a lot of ways. And we don't have those edible pathways. So when I do guerrilla gardening, I'm planting berry bushes and other things along the pathways when I can as well, hopefully keeping them away from any mowers that are coming up as well. So we have more chance to have fruits available. The fruit bushes, I think, are actually really, really good. They're competitive in terms of weed environments. A little different than fruit trees, which are harder to tend to and can be more disease prone. So that's very difficult. We started a program it's called Tri-City Gleaners a while ago, harvesting fruit from local fruit trees and mapping those fruit tree locations and continuing to do urban harvester, urban Tri-City Gleaner program again on bicycles would make sense, but not using cars. So basically bicycles and baskets.
When I was living in Edmonton, there was a, fallen fruit rescue kind of, mostly it was apples from people's backyards. Lots of people have apple trees. And so they would make a whole bunch of cider, like communally, or like jam and resell it and stuff like that. Are the gleaners mostly accessing fruit that's on public land or like privately owned homes or property? Do the homeowners invite them in, or like what is the process for that?
Yeah, good question. So we don't have a formal program right now, but what we would do is actually locate the trees and bushes, map them, and then contact the landowners and get permission to work with them in terms of what was important for them. Like the cherries have been a really big harvest, apples, as you said, pears as well, some years, and then certainly what I'm interested in more berry bushes, so the raspberries and black currants and gooseberries and things like that. And what was the other one? There's a lot of these trees around
Serviceberry.
serviceberries. That's it. Yeah.
Serviceberry, Juneberry, they have like a million types of names. But
Hmm.
yeah, I'm just thinking about like there's some on the path near me that I have definitely taken advantage of.
Yeah, and the
Because
mulberries too, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Although like mulberry trees, if they're not tended, they can get very, very large. So,
Yeah.
that is something where you maybe need to bring a ladder.
Hmm. So I'm kind of interested in getting a hemp license as well. So the Garden Network gets a hemp license. So if we grew a field of hemp, what I'm interested in is the cottage hemp industry locally.
Hmm.
And basically where we're harvesting hemp, using hemp on poorer land that isn't necessarily good for vegetables, but it's pretty hardy and using the fibers for a cottage hemp industry for basket weaving and well, all kinds of material that you can make from hemp, right?
Oh, that's really cool. I know that like there's some public land that remains open that community gardens can't be established on because the land is, like the soil has heavy metals in it or it's not good to grow food. But
Yeah.
if it were these hemp plants, then that wouldn't be so much of an issue. So that sounds like a really great idea.
Yeah, wouldn't you love that? I mean, the old-fashioned techniques are there, and they're by hand techniques, and we know how important it is to be able to reconnect with nature through crafts. Like so, whether it's making hedges, food hedges, like any of those things that have to do with crafts, like spoon making, all those kinds of things, right, are part of getting back to nature.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, fun. I
Mm-hmm.
enjoy fibercraft and that sort of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
not everything has to have a use. Everything, like you can grow things for the sheer pleasure of it and the sheer
Mm-hmm.
joy of it. So if our listeners, Doug, are interested in starting a community garden or networking with community gardens in their area, what kind of advice would you give them?
So that's kind of interesting. I haven't looked at the website for a little while to know for sure, but I think that there's an article on there about how to start a community garden. And the first step would be to look around at where you might want to have a community garden, or you could go to the website and look there, contact the coordinator and see if there's a space in that community garden. But what would be more likely, because there's about 103 gardens in the urban area now, and probably 1,000 people that would like to have a community garden space but don't is get ready to set up a garden.
Awesome. So what if someone is already a member of a community garden, but they're not quite sure how to like they want to network with others. Maybe they live in a different city or municipality and they want to make something kind of like the Waterloo Region Community Garden Network. How would they kind of get started with that?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Well, I think that they've got to be able to contact the people that are coordinating community gardens now and see if they want to form a network, which is basically just build coming together and sharing information, communication around, community gardens, taking a look at, what's happening with the policies as well. Like we have really good regional policies around community gardens where the region's statement in their regional plan is to support community gardens. And they do that in a number of ways. So it's not just funding opportunities through the environmental fund and so forth, but it is through offering free compost as well from the compost program.
I love the compost program here. It's, you can just drive to the dump and grab your compost and or mulch. They have mulch here as well. So it's worth checking out if you live in wherever you live. Check out if your city's garbage or waste facilities have free compost and free mulch. You might be surprised what you can get there. Some waste facilities have, like a free swap area where people can just take stuff that they don't really want, but it's still good, like maybe half a can of paint or something like that, and other people can pick it up.
I just want to say a little bit more about the distribution side, and that is like what we're looking at, like the school food programs. The research coming out of Germany and France are really, really good on the role of school food programs in enhancing the local value chain. And what they mean by that is the connection between the end user, the person that's cooking and serving food, and the distributor and the producer.
Mhm.
And so in that value chain, there's employment for people. It isn't necessarily about sitting at a desk. It isn't necessarily about having a high education. It's about knowing where to go and that means where to do the pickup, where to do the drop off of its distribution, preparing food, cooking food, serving food, and producing food as well. So we're looking at procurement agreements so that we can ideally, if the local producers want it, set up a co-op. And so that if there's a procurement agreement and the end user, whether it's a school cafeteria who has a procurement agreement, if they ask for something that the whole co-op can pitch in to deliver those goods so that we can meet the agreements of the procurement agreement.
Yeah, for sure.
We want to be able to do the cooking as well, like so that we're actually cooking for things like the community fridge so that people have access to foods, even when it's not like a time for them to eat, if they haven't been able to get there, that they have something to eat that they can open and that they have access to cup and a spoon, like would be our pretty big deal, right? So.
Yeah, that's a great idea though, because I'm sure as anyone who's been part of a CSA like box, like a community supported agriculture box, you sometimes get things that you have no idea what to do with. And so if you are food insecure and you get some sort of vegetable that you've never seen before, or that you have never cooked with before, or that you don't even know how to prepare it correctly, then that isn't really very helpful.
Yeah, that's for sure. Like I watched one woman one time. I took a bunch of beans in from the field, and beautiful beans that were surplus to me. And I thought, oh, I'll take those to the community fridge. And I took about 2 or 3 bags of really good beans to the community fridge. And just fortunately, I just sort of hung around for a little while. And a woman came up and grabbed the beans and started stuffing them in the garbage bin right beside the fridge. And I thought, whoa, wait a second, you should drop my beans. Don't take my beans. And we had a little bit of a chase for a while. Well, eventually I got the beans back, but I knew darn well what it was. Like she couldn't use those beans. And if people are unhoused, they don't have a place to cook. Like, and so we're really missing the point unless it's something that can be available for them to take off the shelf and just eat as it is, right? I'd
Yeah,
like to see a microwave
apples or
there too.
something, but you can't really survive off of apples, you know?
Yeah, and there are programs like there's an MCC gleaner program where they put together soups for export overseas, and then there's the raw carrot, which makes up soups that are people can cook up. And so I'm really looking at something that's actually already prepared. Shoppers Drug Mart, for example, has prepared soups in a little Tetra Pak that is ready to eat soups. They'd be cold, but a Tetra Pak is really neat because you got a screw off top. It's not like broken glass, and Tetra Paks are easily recyclable. So something like a Tetra Pak for a prepared food product might be a really good idea for us to look at actually doing that.
I wanted to ask you about the types of community gardens as well. Say someone wants to join and just have sort of an individual plot for themselves versus joining a community garden where are there community gardens where the entire harvest is for a community or do they just go to individual families?
It depends on the garden. So each garden is it's independently structured. So Community, I think, has a program where they mostly want to be able to donate the food. I really think that the sustainable models, the research would say that people need to be able to get a direct benefit from their input. And so that for the gardener to be able to have a return and produce for themselves is meaningful. And what that means is that ideally there's an area of land that's set aside for growing food for food sharing, for donating, but the individual has an option of getting food for themselves as well. I like to see individual beds in that respect, and then a common area beds as well that people, their contribution may not be money. It could be money and time spent in the common area gardens for food donations, right? But the
Yeah.
other thing, Ariel, that we can do that's really important is like participate in the food rescues. Like, for example, there's about 4 people that go down to the food rescue at the Kitchener Market. And we're looking for a kitchen space again for that produce so it can be processed and be available to people in a more processed form. We're still looking at how to improve the distros in that respect as well.
Wow, that's awesome. It's truly, community gardening. You're using every aspect, it sounds like, of sort of communities, from growing the food to preparing the food to picking up food that maybe other people don't want and finding a use for it to really combat food insecurity. I mean,
Food
it
waste as
sounds,
well, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Combating food waste, yeah. So we want to be able to do that at St. Jacobs as well. And so one of the things we're looking at is a lot of the producers there are only bringing in produce that's good to sell, and they're able to sell it or take it back. And we're hoping to be able to develop some agreements with the producers that are bringing food into St. Jacobs in the summer that we actually get their seconds, the things that they don't want to sell at the market, and be able to put those back into the food system as well.
Nice. So rescuing food that, I mean, it's perfectly fine to eat, but it maybe just doesn't look great.
They think they're not going to sell it at the market, and so they leave it on the farm. And so food waste happens on the farm that way as well. And we actually want those seconds. When I was up at one of the fancy grocery stores up in Waterloo one time, I saw a big bag of carrots for something like $2, like maybe a 10-pound bag of carrots for 250. And they were all seconds that came from Fenning's Organic Farm, and they were labeled as horse feed. And I'm thinking like, there's something else we could do with those carrots. Like, excuse me, but that's pretty
Yeah,
rich
well,
horse feed.
and that's really important too, is, educating people about what is edible and what isn't, right? Because if you don't know any better, you would just assume from the label. Like when my grandfather came over to Canada from the Netherlands, he wouldn't eat corn. To him, that's chicken feed. Like that is not human food. It is for the animals. So
Mhm.
being able to sort of recognize, I guess, what is available and being able to even know what those things are and what they can do for you is
Mhm.
is really valuable, I think.
Yeah, we have different staples. Like for the Africans, maize, corn is a staple, the same as wheat is our staple here, and rice is a staple for Southeast Asia, right? And so those are the staple foods. And we think about, what are people bringing into Gaza in those big bags? They're bringing in flour and rice and ground corn, maize as well. And so the staples are really, really important basic nutrition that we need to go with from there. And then supplement that with the proteins that we need as well. If you think about this in terms of what would feed a human for a year, it's 20 bushels of corn and 1 bushel of soybeans would feed an adult male for a year who was working.
A bushel is an imperial and a U.S. unit of volume. The imperial bushel was established in 1864 as equal to the measure of 8 imperial gallons, with no distinction between wet or dry measures, and this is what is in use in the United Kingdom. The modern American or U.S. bushel measures the volume of a cylinder, the size of which is rounded to exactly 2150.42 cubic inches. So, it means however much stuff fits inside that cylinder. The original bushel was a round willow basket, and it's been a unit of measure in England since the Norman conquest in the 11th century.
There'd be enough energy and enough protein. You need a little bit of dirt in there for vitamins and minerals, but basically that's about ration for an adult male for a year.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. If you just sort of like group all of the food together and add it all up, that is fascinating. Wow, and also would be just terrible to eat plain. So
Well, that's why you learn to cook. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
Eat with Alpha is on Instagram is awesome. Like, she's Guyanese and bringing and showing us all these recipes and the spices, and oh my goodness, she's great.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Doug. So, how can our listeners find out more about the Waterloo Region Community Garden Network, and where can they go to sort of learn about what it does?
Yeah, so follow us on our socials, and we are still on X and marginally so, but we're also on Facebook. There's a page on Facebook, and then there's the Instagram account. Community Gardens Waterloo is our Instagram account. Facebook could be Waterloo Region Community Gardens and Waterloo Region Community Garden Network. So wrcgardennetwork.ca is our website, and you can go there and find the contact information, email, and so forth like that. But we're interested in people who want to take the initiative to start new gardens. We're interested in who's got land and who'd be willing to rent their land. So these hand-up models are where everybody is renting land and providing their own inputs for their farming work. So this is their food done their way. This is self-led.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
Thank you for listening to Solarpunk Presents, a podcast hosted and produced by Ariel, Kroon, and Christina de la Rocha.
The audio for this episode was recorded in part on the traditional territory of the neutral Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples.
And in Germany. The opening and closing music for this podcast is Water Cooler Gang by Monkey Warhol, available for use under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.
Don't forget to support us on Patreon at patreon.com/solarpunkpresents.
Every little bit helps us keep bringing you discussions and interviews.
Until the next episode, keep dreaming.
And stay solarpunk.